My name is Kelsey Peterson, and I'm going to be discussing topics on management and negotiation learned from our course and applying it to the movie 12 Angry Men. Topics are personality, behavior, communication, conflict management, negotiation process, leadership, and ethics. Personality and behavior comes from the personality of the jurors and how at first they clashed. Juror number 8 was known as Davis, and he was the first one to step up and say that he didn't believe that the young man in the film was guilty of what he was being accused of. Jury number 3 was very strong-willed and was the last man to change his mind, as well as number 10. He was also very strong-willed, and with all the different personalities in the room, they clashed, making it difficult for all the men to agree at first. Davis asked the important questions, what do I know and how do I know them? He knew that the boy was innocent, and it's because he listened to what was being applied to in court. He kept calm and used creative thinking, which in the end proved that the young man was innocent. Being open to new ideas, as the first couple jury members were, helped Davis's case, because when you're open to new ideas, you can learn new things and change your way of thinking. And not one single man was in charge of this jury room. Most of the men were emotionally stable until the breakdown, which was needed to show that they were wrong. The men that were standing strong, saying that they weren't going to change their minds. They were extroverted and spoke about how they felt. The learning style was that they thought about what might have happened and then applied it. So they thought about it and then reenacted it, which was the learning style that they used. It's important to know yourself in order to understand others. And until the men knew themselves, they couldn't understand what the other people were trying to say. Davis had a high emotional intelligence, so he had self-knowledge, self-management, self-motivation, and empathy, which made him such a strong character in this movie. Communication. Our conflict management book by Barbara Corvette states that communication is effective transfer of intended meaning. There's encoding, decoding, and feedback. So the encoding is structure that is according to his or her understanding. Then the channel is the way you're communicating the information. So in this case, it was face-to-face. And then the decoding is how the receiver is interpreting what was said to them. Then there's feedback, which is how the communication was done. One man would say something and then the other man would come back. That's feedback on how they heard something and kept the ball rolling and came to the conclusion that they did. Listening is an important part of communication, more important than speaking at times. You need to listen to understand and not to reply. Listening is how we get ideas from one another, and truly hearing what that person is saying is important. Body language is a type of communication. In this scenario, when the men would walk away from the table, you knew that they were upset about something. Something that you might understand better too is that when you're on your phone while somebody's having a conversation with you, that's telling them something that you're not listening. And again, communication is important because this is how we deal with one another every single day. You communicate every single day, whether it's verbally, non-verbally, through text messages. No matter what it's about, that's how you get your everyday work done, is through communication. Conflict comes from our book, Resolving Everyday Conflict by Ken Sand and Kevin Johnson. It states that On page 14, conflict happens when we are at odds with another person over what you think, want, or do. In the film, there was conflict because all of the men agreed on one thing except for one, and they didn't like that, which started conflict. We need to remember that not all conflict needs to be negative. Conflict is how we learn from one another, and it's important to know how to properly manage that conflict, enhancing learning and effectiveness. If all the men agreed that the boy in the film was guilty and Davis never stood up, then an innocent man could have went to prison or been put to death in this case. But Davis stood up, and because conflict was invited in, the men could now talk about it, and without that one man standing up and starting conflict, the minds of the other men would have never been changed, and the outcome could have been very different. The negotiation process starts with preparation, introduction, initiation, intensification, and closing. So you want to prepare what you want to say. During the trial, Davis was thinking about what he wanted to say and how he was going to introduce that and back that up. The introduction is how he started it off by saying that the boy was innocent. He asked the tough questions. There was usually a good guy versus bad guy scenario here, which is okay because then they can get ideas off of one another. A little bit of bullying and anger, but that's what made the people break, is that they knew that they were wrong in the end. And Davis had persistence and patience, and he trusted that he was doing the right thing. It's important to look for common ground because that's also where you can feed off of one another. Not losing control of yourself, again, like anger and breaking. And it's important to listen, speak, and watch one another and how we interact. Davis had good leadership in this film, and some ways that he portrayed that was with his critical or creative thinking. He didn't believe that a crippled man could get from his bed to the door to see the young man fleeing from the home in the time that he said he had. He heard what the man said in court, remembered it, and then applied creative thinking to it. They listened to others' ideas. One man started off saying something about the train and the time, and then the next man brought more ideas into that. So their ideas played off of one another and they came to a better conclusion. So learning from one another, staying emotionally stable, like I stated earlier, not losing your cool, and being motivated towards what you want, knowing what you want and what the outcome is that you want is important. And it's a good leader to present all of these things. Ethics was presented here because Davis knew the difference between right and wrong. He knew he couldn't just let the boy take the fall for something he hadn't done, and he didn't want to give in and just agree with the other men. Be open to having a change of heart and a change of mind, and knowing what God wants for us and what he thinks would be right was important in this film. When one man stood up and said that he disagreed, and then the rest of them started standing up, it's because they knew that they had to think deep about what was being said and be true to themselves and do the right thing for this young boy. Now that you understand more about the personality and behaviors, communication, conflict, the negotiation process, and leadership that involves conflict and the negotiation process, hopefully this will help you for the next time you have conflict in your life, and you can think about these things and apply them to that to have the best outcome. Thank you.